A quick word before we get into today's podcast. Our dogs are a huge part of the family, and like any dog owner, I want to ensure that they are getting the proper stuff. And this is why we absolutely love Butternut Box. They just make it incredibly easy to feed your dog well. Every single plan is perfectly portioned and tailored precisely to your dog's age, breed, and lifestyle. They have over 11 recipes to choose from, so if you have a fussy eater or a dog with allergies, they're sorted. The meals are delivered straight to your door frozen, so you never run out. You just leave a few pouches out in the fridge to defrost, and you're good to go. Plus, you can now find them in Maxi Zoo stores if you need to grab a pack. It leads to better digestion and healthier guts, which every dog owner can appreciate. Go to butternutbox.com/lines of enquiry and use the code lines of enquiry to get 50% off your first 2 boxes today.
GoLoud.
My name is John Sweetman, and this is Lines of Enquiry Case Notes. In Case Notes, we step away from telling one specific case in detail and instead take some time to reflect, to revisit past investigations, and to respond directly to you, the listener. These episodes are about opening up the conversation. We'll be speaking with expert guest contributors, diving a little deeper into the issues behind the stories, and responding to some of the much valued correspondence that comes into our mailbox. If you have a message you'd like to share, a case you'd like us to revisit, or someone you'd like to hear from on future episodes of Case Notes, you can get in touch with us at linesofenquiry@goloudnow.com. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at Lines of Enquiry Podcast to keep up to date. My guest today is Geoff Knupfer, former lead investigator with the Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains. Geoff spent almost 2 decades working with the Commission, leading searches for the disappeared, those abducted, murdered, and secretly buried during the Troubles. Before that, Geoff served for 30 years with the Greater Manchester Police, where he worked on a number of major investigations, including the search for victims of the Moors murders. Throughout his career, Geoff has been driven by a commitment to finding answers for families, often in cases where hope had begun to fade. Geoff, you're very welcome.
Pleasure.
Some of our listeners probably remember you being mentioned in relation to one of our episodes we covered back in a previous season, the search for Seamus Ruddy. You were involved in that as chief investigator with the Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains.
I was the lead investigator and the guy that they came to in 2005. The two governments and the commissioners in 2005 contacted me and asked me if I could look at what had gone on since the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement was 1998, of course, and the Commission was established in 1999. And things had really ground to a halt because the original system was effectively a reactive process. So it was really a case of trying to reinvigorate the process.
Yeah.
And in simple terms, transforming it from a reactive organisation into a proactive organisation. And bringing to bear the skills that the likes of us guys have as investigators, and specialist knowledge, of course.
And then, of course, you were former Manchester Police.
That's right, yes.
And how long were you in the job for?
I was in for 30 years.
30 years. I was just trying to do the maths. So
yeah, I joined in 1967 and retired in 1997. Spent most of my time in the criminal investigation department. First 4 years, like we all did, I started pounding the beat on the street and then went into the CID in the early 70s and remained in the CID throughout my career. Towards the end of it, I was posted to the Home Office in London. I was a specialist advisor at the Home Office on crime investigation and major incident investigation forensic science. So that's really my background. Forensic science was the thing, and homicide investigation.
Yeah. And so you would have had any amount of experience then going into the job with the Commission?
Yes, I did. In the 1980s, I got involved in the review of the so-called Moors murders.
Right, yes.
The case of Mara Hindley and Ian Brady and the 5 children they abducted and murdered. And I was deputy when that started. And then a year or two later, my boss of the day, who'd appointed me as his deputy, Peter Topping, retired. And whilst most of the donkey work had been done by that time. I kind of adopted responsibility for it thereafter.
And this was in the 80s?
Oh, yeah, it was all in the 80s.
All in the 80s. Was she coming forward with information about some of the victims?
Sort of, yeah. The original offences had occurred in the early 1960s, and they were arrested in 1965 and convicted in 1966 of child abduction and murders. So they were both sentenced to life imprisonment. They were convicted of 3 murders, but there were 2 other children who were missing, who were never formally linked to that case, or cases, should I say. So the review that we undertook in the 1980s was really to find out what happened to the other 2 missing children. Prior to that point, there had never been any formal connection between Brady and Hindley and the other 2 missing kids.
And they were, was it
Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett. So the review in the 1980s came about because a journalist called Fred Harrison managed to wheedle his way into prison to see Ian Brady. And he pretended to be a kind of social worker, for want of a better description, who was going to help Ian Brady, when in fact he was a tabloid journalist. So he did a bit of a con job and carried this on for some time. And then eventually he came out and wrote a headline saying that Brady had confessed to these other 2 murders to him, which Brady hadn't. All he'd done was not say he'd done them. He didn't say he hadn't done them either. So, of course, tabloid journalism being what it is, that's good enough.
He didn't speak to Moira Hindley at that time?
No, he didn't.
So was it on the back of that then that you went about investigating whether or not the 2 missing kids were victims?
Yeah, it wasn't quite as straightforward as that because this newspaper coverage prompted a lot of people getting in touch with Greater Manchester Police at the time and providing fresh information. I mean, the sort of example would be an elderly lady coming along and saying, well, you know, I'm a widow now, but I remember going out onto Saddleworth Moor because it's a lovely part of the world in the Pennines. You know, I remember going out one evening for a drive and seeing a man and a woman walking down the road with a sack and a shovel. So that must have been Brady and Hindley. Well, not necessarily, because people went up there and borrowed peat. I use borrowed in its widest term. Took a bit of peat for the gardens, and other people buried pets there. So there were lots of reasons why people saw what they saw.
And did you have direct contact with both Brady and Hindley then?
Yes. Brady was detained. By that time, he'd been moved from the prison system into a psychiatric hospital, secure psychiatric hospital, whilst Hindley was still in prison. Brady was suffering from schizophrenia and personality disorder. Very, very difficult character to deal with, as you can imagine. Hindley also, as Brady was, a very intelligent individual. She was obviously still in the prison system. Both were very manipulative, really. And everybody said, you're not going to get the time of day out of Moira Hindley. You know, she's really good at working the system. And to our complete astonishment, got into the prison. We contacted the prison governor, made arrangements for this interview to take place, but didn't tell anybody else in the prison service because we were frightened of leaks.
Yeah, of course.
So we arrived at the Cookham Prison in Kent, knocked on the door, went in and asked to speak to the governor, and of course he knew who we were. We went in and met Moira Hindley. And straight away she said, you know, what is it? How can I help? Which was a bit of a surprise, to say the least. What we didn't know is that one of the mothers had written to her. Sadly, she was being manipulated by the media as well, you know, and tabloid journalists had really written this letter for her. But they'd sent it in her name, they'd sent it to Hindley. And for whatever reason, she decided to help. I think in the bigger picture is that she'd spent 20 years plus in prison at that stage. She and her advisors were looking at ways to get her out. They thought that perhaps if she admitted all this, you know, maybe they could go to the European courts and get her out at 10 years on. So I think it was a long-term policy of getting her released from prison. She died beforehand, so it didn't happen.
For ordinary lay people, like, it must seem that it must be very daunting to sit opposite somebody like Moira Hindley, but by that stage you would have been a seasoned copper and would have dealt with plenty of individuals. But I'd still, in all, I'd say it did carry a certain amount of weight. I'd say it was a bit daunting in some respect.
It was a bit of a surprise because you probably won't have seen it, but there was an arrest photograph of her, a bleached blonde.
Oh, I know I know that one,
and this was everywhere. It's been published thousands and thousands, or republished thousands and thousands of times.
Yeah.
So, of course, not having seen her for 20 years and no imagery of her, as far as I'm aware, in that intervening period, I was quite surprised when this very plain, ordinary woman walked in. Very articulate, very polite, a chain smoker. I came out, I can remember coming out reeking of cigarette smoke. Yeah. But she said straight away, she was very careful the way she did it. She said, I'm prepared to point out to you areas that were of interest to Ian Brady on Saddleworth Moor, which was a polite code for saying, I'll tell you where his stomping ground was. We had a pretty good idea where we were going to look anyway, and she was able to confirm that's where they were. And very quickly, her solicitor came out and spoke to the press and said she's prepared to go back to Saddleworth Moor and point out these areas. So it put enormous pressure on us, to get her back to the moor in a manner that would be acceptable to the prison authorities and the Home Office.
Yeah. You did get her back out there.
We did.
Was it with her help that you found, was it Keith Bennett or Pauline Reid? I think you found...
Well, yeah, we found Pauline Reid the following year. Keith Bennett, we were confident that what she said was correct and that Keith was buried where she said he was. I don't want to cause added distress to the family, but you have a situation where Brady was a classic criminal in that he always dug shallow graves. All of his graves were shallow affairs, and this one was no exception. And she described how he was in a peat gully. So if I can try and paint the picture of a peat outcrop sitting on top of bedrock, peat outcrop that's 2 or 3 meters deep, so it's a substantial thing. He's down in the bottom of this thing, and she is on the top keeping watch. When he killed the little boy, she went down into the gully with him, and he tried digging a grave downwards, vertical. And of course, he hit bedrock straight away. Yeah. So he then dug sideways into this peat bank, not very deep. Well, it doesn't take a genius to work out what's going to happen the first time it rains. Yeah. And as I say, I don't want to cause unnecessary distress to the family, but that body was clearly exposed very early on, and the inevitable consequences of that are that the body isn't here anymore. Yeah. And with Brady and Hindley, what we did, we ended up with confessions from both of them, plus evidence as well, because we'd recovered one of the bodies, one of the 2 bodies. So we had a wealth of evidence to put before the courts, and we prepared a file of evidence, and it went to the legal authorities who said that they were going to take no further action because these 2 were serving full life tariffs and they weren't going to go anywhere. So
still, you'd think for the the victims' families.
Well, absolutely, but I think everybody accepted, even the families, probably that this was just going to be a media spectacle for the tabloid press. So for whatever reason, it was probably a sound decision. When I retired from the police, I went into academia for a few years and again was teaching forensic science and major incident homicide investigation and management. So when the call came 2004, 2005 to come over here, I guess I'd got some experience of forensic archaeology because it didn't exist in, as a science, a separate science in the 1980s. But it had developed in the intervening period. And so when I came over here, I was able to say, well, there are other things we can do apart from just dig holes. We can do this in a more sensible way. I think the most important thing, the key bit of all this, is that where the first lot was a criminal process, this is now a humanitarian process, and it's about recovering victims and returning them to the families. Any questions being asked about and not prosecuting people.
Yeah, I would imagine with the commission, any information that was passed on was done so with the understanding that it wouldn't be used for criminal prosecutions on behalf of those people, providing the information. But I would imagine that the victims' families were probably more concerned about locating their loved ones' remains rather than somebody being held accountable.
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 facets to this, because first and foremost, the Commission's legislation was absolutely crystal clear on this, that this is a humanitarian process, and any information received can only be used to recover victims. By law, it can't be used in a criminal prosecution. I guess the perpetrators were were reassured, one would hope, by that legislation. I think it's probably fair to say that trust built up over the years. When we started, I think they were probably, understandably, they were wary of us and we were wary of them. But we developed a good level of trust between us. We were able to talk freely. We were able to ask to see primary sources rather than going through interlocutors on every occasion. In some cases that happened, and others it didn't. But that was never disclosed, and never disclosed to the families. They didn't know what else we knew about it, because those were the rules of engagement. And I think it was a great compromise on the family's point of view, in that they were agreeing to this process taking place in the knowledge that the deal was that their loved one would be returned to them, but no prosecution would take place, not on behalf of the Commission. The police could still investigate separately, but not the Commission.
And then by the time you retired, 13 of the so-called disappeared out of a total of 17 had been located.
That's right, yeah. There are just four cases outstanding at the present.
It must be terrible then for families of those 4 people that still haven't been found to hear about a search being unsuccessful, having seen the success that the Commission has had with some of the other investigations. You obviously have to work closely with the family.
Certainly, when I was with the Commission, we worked very closely with them. We had our own liaison officer within the Commission. We asked the families to put up a single point of contact within the families so that we could always engage with that individual, and then it was up to that individual to disseminate any information we provided amongst family members. Yeah. And that worked to some degree. It worked reasonably well.
We all want our dogs to live the happiest, healthiest lives possible, but a lot of standard dog food out there just isn't cutting it. That's where Butternut Box comes in. Their mission is simple: to deliver health and happiness to dogs and their humans. They use high-quality, whole ingredients that are so good they've actually been taste tested by humans. When your dog starts eating better food, you see the results directly. More excitement at mealtimes, a shinier coat, and a much happier gut. It's not about being fancy, it's just about giving them real food that brings out the best in them. If you want to make the switch, head over to butternutbox.com/lines of enquiry. Use the promo code Lines of Enquiry at the checkout, and they'll give you a massive 50% off your first 2 boxes. Your dog will thank you for it. I found it fascinating when we were doing the Seamus Ruddy episodes, because like many of the cases that we covered, I don't necessarily know the ins and outs of some of these cases, and I found it really interesting. What was the biggest differences for you being in charge of a crime scene as a member of the police, and then later as the Commission?
Yeah, I was going to say this wasn't a crime scene. That's the fundamental difference. Yeah. It's about recovery and repatriation, no questions asked. The complications are there because it's also a coroner's case. We have to put this before a coroner ultimately, and the coroner is interested in the cause of death and identification. So our bit was the identification, which we did by DNA profiling, which was, thank goodness, it was pretty easy. One of my first recommendations was that we have our own confidential DNA database for all family members, surviving family members. And that worked pretty well because all dental records and all medical records had disappeared by the time we started in 2005. So that was number one priority, to get DNA profiles from all surviving family members before anybody else passed away, of course. Yeah. So we had 1 or 2 mums and dads, but predominantly brothers and sisters. And in some cases children, of course. I mean, one of the other interesting little asides, which I'm sure will resonate with you, was that in one of the early cases, the former paramilitaries produced a body, nobody knows from where, in a coffin and left it in a disused graveyard. This is way back in 1999, and Garda Síochána, serving as agents of the Commission at that point, went to the churchyard, went to the graveyard to collect the body. But they went in forensic suits, they went in scene suits, And of course, the former paramilitaries cried foul and said, "Hey, hang on a minute! No, this is supposed to be humanitarian, not forensic." And the guards rightly said, "Well, we're doing this because it's a health and safety issue, not because it's a forensic issue."
Yeah.
But from that point onwards, we didn't wear, as a matter of course, we didn't wear forensic clothing at recovery scenes.
Obviously, you did wear protective clothing and stuff like that, but not
forensic
automatically be looked upon as it's the guys in the white suits and the
that's
crime
right.
scene.
That was a problem, and that's what caused the misunderstanding.
The perception of it being a crime scene. And would it have been up to you to inform the family, or would personally, shall we say, or would that come from?
No, we did. We always did that. We instituted a policy right from the word go. This is from 2005, that whatever happened in an individual case, the family would never find out what was going on from anybody other than the commission in the first instance. So we never wanted anybody to pick up a newspaper or turn a radio on or see a television newscast and find out something about their case.
Yeah.
So we appointed a family liaison officer right from the word go. And it was actually John, who you know about.
Yeah.
And John was always in touch with the families.
This is John Hill.
John Hill, that's
right. He was
right,
boots on the ground
Absolutely,
in France when they found Seamus's remains.
Yeah. And so we always made sure that the families were not disappointed in the work of the commission, if that makes sense. They found out first.
You retired in 2023 after... nearly
shy of 20
years in the commission. It must have been immensely satisfying that you were able to be partially responsible for recovering 13 of the 17 disappeared, on top of your career in the police. So, surely you've found time to relax now, or are you still looking for challenges or whatever?
It was very, very rewarding work. I mean, there's no two ways about that.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful, wonderful job to be able to do, and great to satisfy, if that's the right word, families or get closure for families. That's for sure.
I would think it must have been a privilege to be able to.
It was
do that.
Absolutely, and wonderble people. Some remarkable. People we met and engaged with throughout. And interestingly, now I'm talking to families of people who disappeared during the War of Independence, the Civil War period, and they too want, albeit it's 100 years or more ago, they too want their families, their family loved ones returned to them. Yeah. So I think that's a big ask of the government and officialdom. At the moment, what's going to happen about that?
But what I see now, and we were recording earlier on, we were recording an episode on the murder of Tina Satchwell in Cork a few years ago. And forensic archaeology was extremely important there. Forensic anthropology and stuff like that is very important in certain cases,
Well, forensic archaeology didn't exist in 1980s when we were doing the Moors stuff. And it's developed over the years since, and I'm quite thrilled by the fact that I was involved in that in some small way. But the one incident that I will never forget was working on the Saddleworth Moor cases, the missing cases or outstanding cases, and somehow or other I contacted a professor at the Smithsonian in the States.
Right.
Who was an archaeologist, and I can always remember. He said, "So what are you doing?" So I said, "Well, we're sitting or kneeling on pallets, and we're using pointing trowels to." And he said, "What?" He said, "You're going to be doing that for the next 20 years." And I said, "Yeah, but that's how we've been taught. We had this sort of crash course on traditional conventional archaeology, if you want." And he came across. He came over. He was en route somewhere else, and he called in in the UK, and he said, "Throw away your pointing trowels. You want wheelbarrows and you want bucket. All the kit. This is not. You're not looking for archaeological exhibits. You're looking for human remains.
Yeah, you're not looking for coins and
correct. You're looking for murder victims. And of course that is the one thing, the one aspect of all this that wasn't appreciated in those days, and it certainly is now.
Would that have been to the fore, say, when the likes of Fred West's victims were being recovered from many of his houses? Would it have been kind of in the earlier days, different times?
Well, I've got to be careful what I say about other people investigating things. But
yeah. I think would you imagine that was still there in some form?
Well, I think I'm not sure how much forensic archaeology was used in the West case, but if it wasn't, it should have been. Let's put it that way. I'm sure it was to some degree.
Yeah.
The experts have to be aware of the fact that this is different from conventional archaeology. If, say, a suspect is in custody, then there is an issue of speed about all this, and you can't rattle round with pointing trowels and saying, well, I'll do this at my pace.
Yeah.
I think that the problem we encountered early on in the 80s and 90s and perhaps later was that archaeologists were coming along and thought they should be running the show, not the senior investigator.
Yeah.
And you've got to be clear that experts are there to support and assist the senior investigator, be the head of everything. I think there were one or two steep learning curves in those days where experts come along and think they are going to be ruling the roost here, and no, they're not. There's only one individual ruling the roost, and that's a senior investigator.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have to ask you, because I'm not great on geography. You know, you spent most of your time in the Greater Manchester area.
Yeah.
Would you have any crossover with the Yorkshire Ripper case?
No, I mean, I was a relatively young detective in those days. I suppose the tentacles of the Ripper case.
That's what I'm just thinking about, the tentacles everywhere. Yeah.
All over the northwest.
Yeah.
And even further afield into central England. So we were all doing bits and pieces and keeping observations and what have you, but I was never directly involved in...
No, I only ask because I remember it as a young lad, and it was everywhere all the time, and I still remember him being caught. But it was like, and I was aware of Hindley and Brady from those famous mugshots, growing up, the Moors murder. These are the Moors murder. So like this stuff gets ingrained in your your psyche. But I just find it fascinating that you've spoken to these people face to face and had plenty of dealings with them. And thankfully, in the case of Moyer Hindley, it led to the recovery of Pauline Reed's remains.
One other point, going back to the Ripper case, it was all the filing was paper filing. It was all card indexes and what have you, and the police station that this was run from. I don't know whether you're aware of this. They had to reinforce the floor because of the sheer weight of paper that they had generated. The case had generated, and it was as a result of that computerization of homicide cases. It certainly in the UK. The Home system, the Home Office large major inquiry system, came about, and I was very fortunate to work on the first case in Greater Manchester that used a computerized system. Right. This was before Holmes came about, and we had a small system that was an individual system, if you want, that we were really trying out to see whether this process worked. And I can always remember working on this particular murder case. I was in the serious crime squad at the time, so we managed, if you want, for a better description, murder inquiries. And we said to the senior investigator, who was a detective chief superintendent, can we run this on the computer? First time. Can we run this on the computer? Yeah. And you can imagine him going, oh my goodness me.
Yeah.
And very wisely, he said, yeah, you can run this on computer if you want, but I also want a paper backup done side by side. Yeah. And would you believe, about 4 days into the inquiry, the computer packed up.
Right.
So that was, as I say, I'm quite a landmark for me. It was the first one in my force, and it's a big force.
I found myself when we had different computer systems over the years for exhibit tracking, really, you have the pulse system and all that, which is separate, but we had different exhibit tracking systems over the years. Some of them were good, some of them absolute nightmares, and you spent longer inputting information onto these things than you actually did investigating, but a lot has to be said, though, I think, for the written record. because I remember a particular case. I was involved with a handwriting case, and some of it predated me being in the handwriting section, but I was able to go to hardback handwritten ledgers of different years and find the cases without having to jump through hoops on a computer system. But there's pros and cons for both, but it's finding the happy ground there, between them. I'm a bit old-fashioned when it comes to that way, that, a paper trail may be better in some cases.
Oh, it certainly helps on occasion. I was going to say the other little aside, interesting little aside. This system that I'm talking about. We had an air disaster just the year before the review into the Moors murders occurred. An aircraft caught fire at Manchester Airport, and 50-odd people were killed. And it's an appalling case. And dental records became a big issue. And one of the guys I worked with, who was a bit of an IT whiz, he was ahead of his time at this, and he said, I think I can use this computerized system that we're talking about. It has a vehicle description index on it. And he said, I think I can use that vehicle descriptive index to record dental records. And I can always remember this forensic odontologist said, don't be stupid. Don't be stupid, man. What do you think? We've been trying to do this for years and it's never worked. Blow me, he did, and he made it work, and he was able to identify people from his auto index. So you could describe crowns, missing teeth, fillings, and what have you. And it was very good. I mean, he was a bit of a boffin, this guy, but he was very, very good, and he
didn't patent it afterwards.
No, but there you go.
I've often wondered, because like in Ireland in Southern Ireland we have the one police force. We've got the Gardaí, and then you have the PSNI in the north. Was it a problem in some other cases that maybe have crossed borders and that you're dealing with different constabularies? Was there a problem with maybe sharing information?
Certainly in 1965 in England, I've forgotten how many forces there were, but there were many. And certainly as far as the original Moors murder was concerned, there were children abducted from Lancashire, from Manchester, and they were found. Brady and Hindley lived in Cheshire. Yeah. And some of them were buried in West Yorkshire. So you can see there were 5 or 6 forces involved right from the word go. Fortunately, one individual was appointed as the overall head of the inquiry, which made life easier. Yeah. But I think, I won't name names, but, he made mistakes. There is no doubt about it, as we all do. Yes. And I remember going in my time to interview the head of the Lancashire side of it. This was many years later. This was in the 80s. And just a charismatic character who, had he been left to his own devices, that wouldn't have been wrapped up then. It would have continued. Yeah. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, it's a bit like we had another gentleman in here a few months ago. You've probably come across him, Alan Bailey. Yes. And he was head of what we call the cold case unit.
Yes. He wrote a book on it, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, he's written a few books, I think.
Has he?
Yeah. But I see it now, and it can only be a good thing that there's more and more cases where there are a second look at something, a review of something. That stuff is still going to be looked at again if it warrants being looked at, and if things were done correctly and all that sort of stuff, which I think can only be a good thing.
I think that's so important. Yeah. And also technology moves on.
Yeah, absolutely.
You look at DNA profiling in its heyday. I mean, when we recovered Pauline Reed in 1986, 87, I think. Yeah. It was in the earliest days of DNA profiling, and we couldn't get a profile. We had to rely on clothing and deposition and obviously confessions and admissions to satisfy everybody that was Pauline Reed we'd recovered. But we hadn't got dental records, albeit we tried DNA because it's the first. Really, I think probably the first in Greater Manchester, which still is a big force. It's about the third largest in England and Wales. It wouldn't work. I mean, today.
It just keeps going. It's something like DNA, and this is coming from a former fingerprint expert.
Yes,
he'd be loath to say it, but DNA is fantastic.
It's remarkable,
and it's just going to keep getting better and better.
Of course,
although And I'll always say this to people about DNA.
Problems. Yeah.
No, well, I always used to say it to people about the fingerprints, and I say, yeah, but identical twins will have the same DNA, whereas they won't have the same fingerprints. But it's a fantastic tool, nevertheless. And as you say, it's just one of the many things that, with technology, just keeps on improving over time. Yeah.
And throws up the complication of contamination, of course. That has to be managed as well.
Yeah, the handling of exhibits, the continuity, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Everything has to, all the plates have to be spinning at the same time.
That's right.
Well, Geoff, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here for this case notes, and I've no doubt that we're going to cross swords again somewhere along the line.
Sure.
In a good way, because I'd sit and listen to you all day, and I'm sure our listeners have found it fascinating. The more people are exposed to the like of the work that the Commission does or has done and will continue to do going forward. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Geoff. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. I think we must say before we go, please do make sure you dish out at the end of this the contact details for the Commission, so that if anybody has any information whatsoever about any of the outstanding cases, they can get in touch with the Commission. And rest assured, that will be in total confidence.
Yeah.
We have a recorded system there, so you can ring the anonymous number and either do it yourself or get somebody else to do it. Anybody in the Commission. I keep on saying we because I am retired now.
You have to let go.
We'd be delighted to hear from anybody who can help in any shape, size and form. There are families at the end of this and they want their loved ones back. Rightly so.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Geoff.
Pleasure.
Thank you. If you have any information for the Independent Commission for the location of victims' remains, you can email them at secretary@iclvr.ie. That email again is secretary@iclvr.ie. Or you can leave a confidential voice message on +353 1602 8655. Thank you for listening to this episode of Lines of Enquiry. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review, sharing it to your story on social media, leaving a comment below, or simply telling a friend you enjoyed it. Your support helps us make more episodes. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email linesofinquiry@goloudnow.com. Lines of Enquiry is presented by me, John Sweetman. The podcast is created by Darren Cleary. Our executive producer is Owen Brennan. Aoife Plunkett is our producer with assistance from Siobhan Maguire. Remember, in the end, everything done in the dark comes to light.